My name is Daniel, and for as long as I can remember, I've been living in the shadow of my older brother, Logan. It's a classic story, I guess, the golden child versus the other one. Logan was the star athlete, the charming one who effortlessly made friends, the one who always got the benefit of the doubt. Me? I was the quiet, reliable one, the one who got good grades without much fanfare, the one who was always expected to be understanding and accommodating. It wasn't malicious, not always. Sometimes, it felt like my parents just naturally gravitated towards Logan's brighter, more boisterous personality. Other times, especially when we were kids, it felt downright unfair. Like the time Logan crashed my brand new bike and got a slap on the wrist while I was grounded for a week for not being more careful when he borrowed it. Or the countless school events where Logan's achievements were celebrated with gusto, while my own accomplishments received a polite nod and a "that's nice, honey." As we got older, the dynamic didn't really change, it just morphed. Logan sailed through life, seemingly immune to consequences. He bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, racking up debt that my parents often quietly helped him out of. He went through girlfriends like tissues, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty promises. And through it all, I was the steady Eddie, the one who went to college, got a decent job as a software engineer, and actually, built a life. Don't get me wrong, I love my brother. Or at least, I want to love him. We share a history, a childhood full of shared, mostly his adventures and inside jokes. But there's this constant undercurrent of disappointment, maybe on his part, maybe on mine. He always seemed to view my stable life as boring, lacking the thrill and excitement he craved. And I often felt like he just didn't appreciate the sacrifices my parents made for him, the constant bailouts and second chances. The latest chapter in the Logan saga started about 6 months ago. He'd been talking about needing a new car for ages. His old clunker was finally on its last legs, sputtering and wheezing its way through town. Of course, Logan being Logan, he wasn't looking for just any car. He had his sights set on a brand new, top-of-the-line sports car, the kind that screams, "Look at me," from 3 blocks away. My parents, predictably, were hesitant. They'd already helped him out with so much over the years, and this was a major purchase. But Logan, ever the charmer, wore them down. He promised he'd be more responsible, that this was a sign he was finally turning a corner. He even managed to convince them that having a reliable car would help him with his latest business venture. Something involving cryptocurrency that sounded vaguely scam-like to me. Eventually, my parents relented. They didn't outright buy him the car, but they co-signed on the loan, which, let's be honest, is pretty much the same thing when it comes to Logan. He picked out a sleek, cherry red model, the kind that probably cost more than my entire savings account. He was ecstatic, showing it off to everyone, taking friends for joyrides, and posting endless pictures on social media. I tried to be happy for him, I really did, but there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Logan has a history of not taking care of expensive things. Remember the time he got a state-of-the-art gaming laptop as a graduation gift and spilled soda all over it within a month? Or the time he borrowed my dad's boat and forgot to properly cover it, leading to some serious water damage? Sure enough, it wasn't long before the cracks started to show. I'd hear my parents on the phone with him, their voices tight with worry. He'd missed a payment here, gotten a parking ticket there. Small things at first, but they were adding up. And then came the real kicker. About a month ago, I was visiting my parents for Sunday dinner. As usual, Logan was late. When he finally strolled in, about an hour after we'd started eating, he had this sheepish look on his face. "Hey guys, sorry I'm late," he said, grabbing a plate and loading it up with food. "Where were you, Logan?" my mom asked, her tone laced with concern. He shrugged. "Just out." "Out doing what?" my dad pressed. Logan sighed dramatically. "Look, it's no big deal, okay? I kinda scratched the car." My parents exchanged worried glances. "Scratched it? How badly?" my mom asked. Just a little fender bender," Logan said dismissively. "Some idiot pulled out in front of me. No biggie." But it was a biggie. As it turned out, it wasn't just a scratch. It was a pretty significant dent in the front fender, and the headlight was cracked. The repair estimate my dad got was astronomical. And of course, Logan's insurance deductible was sky high because he'd opted for the cheapest plan. My parents were furious, and rightfully so. They'd stuck their necks out for him, and here he was, being careless with this incredibly expensive car. They laid into him, reminding him of his responsibilities, of the financial burden he was putting on them. Logan, as always, deflected. He blamed the other driver. He complained about the cost of repairs. He even tried to guilt-trip my parents for making him feel bad. It was the same old song and dance. I sat there, listening to the familiar argument, a knot of frustration tightening in my stomach. It wasn't just about the car. It was about the pattern, the constant irresponsibility, the way he always seemed to skate by while others picked up the pieces. Later that evening, after Logan had stormed off in a huff, my dad sighed heavily. "I don't know what we're going to do, Daniel," he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We can't keep doing this." My mom nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "He just doesn't seem to learn, does he?" That's when it hit me. The unfairness of it all, the way Logan took everything for granted, the way my parents always seemed to enable him. I'd always been the good son, the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything. And what did I get? To watch my brother make mistake after mistake, knowing that I'd probably end up having to help clean up his mess eventually. The next day, I was at work, staring blankly at my computer screen. The conversation from the night before replaying in my head. I started thinking about the car. Logan loved that car. It was his prized possession, the ultimate symbol of his imagined success. And he didn't deserve it. Not after the way he'd treated my parents. Not after the years of irresponsibility. An idea started to form in my mind. A crazy, impulsive idea that made my heart race a little. What if the car just disappeared? I know it sounds drastic, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way to make Logan truly understand the consequences of his actions. My parents had tried talking to him, grounding him when he was younger, even threatening to cut him off financially. Nothing had worked. Maybe losing something he valued so much would finally get through to him. Over the next few weeks, the idea solidified into a plan. It wasn't something I took lightly. I'm not a vengeful person by nature, but this felt different. It felt like a necessary intervention, a way to finally level the playing field. I started doing some research. I looked into what it would take to sell a car that wasn't technically mine, since my parents were co-signers. It turned out to be more complicated than I initially thought, but not impossible. With a little bit of creative paperwork and a few carefully worded conversations, I figured I could make it happen. The opportunity presented itself last weekend. Logan had gone out of town for a few days on another one of his business trips. My parents were also away visiting some friends out of state. The house was empty, and Logan's shiny red sports car was sitting in the driveway, practically begging to be relocated. I rented a flatbed tow truck under a false name. Late on Saturday night, when I was sure all the neighbors were asleep, I carefully backed the truck into the driveway. It felt surreal, like I was in some kind of heist movie. My hands were shaking as I hooked up the car and secured it to the flatbed. Driving away with Logan's precious car felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I took it to a prearranged buyer, someone I'd found online who was willing to pay a decent price. No questions asked. I'd already forged the necessary paperwork, making it look like Logan had authorized the sale. The transaction was quick and surprisingly easy. I walked away with a hefty sum of cash, more money than I'd ever held in my hands at once. Felt wrong, so wrong, but also strangely satisfying. I stashed the money in a safe deposit box, not sure what I was going to do with it yet. Maybe give it to my parents to help cover some of Logan's debts. Maybe keep it as a sort of insurance policy. The next day, Logan called me, his voice filled with panic. "Daniel, you won't believe this. My car. It's gone. Someone stole my car." I played dumb, feigning shock and concern. "What? Are you serious? That's terrible, Logan." "Yeah. I woke up this morning, and it wasn't in the driveway. I called the cops, but they said there's not much they can do." Can you believe it? I could believe it. I was the one who made it happen. But I kept my voice even, offering words of sympathy and support. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. I knew this wouldn't be the end of it. Logan would be furious, and eventually he'd probably figure out what really happened. The thought of confronting him, of facing his anger and my parents' disappointment, made my stomach churn. But then I remembered all the times I'd been overlooked, all the times Logan had taken advantage of everyone around him. And a strange sense of resolve washed over me. This was my new plan. No more being the shadow brother. No more enabling Logan's irresponsible behavior. It was time for him to face the consequences, even if those consequences were orchestrated by his own, usually invisible, younger brother. I have a feeling things are about to get very interesting. Logan is due back in town tonight. I can only imagine the explosion that's coming. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen next. But one thing's for sure. Life in the shadow of Logan is officially over. The call came late that night, just as I was settling in with a book, trying to distract myself from the inevitable. My phone buzzed with Logan's number. I took a deep breath and answered. "Daniel, you're not going to believe this." His voice was strained, tight with fury. "The cops. They think my car wasn't stolen." My heart skipped a beat. What? What do you mean?" I tried to sound genuinely surprised. "They said there were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, nothing. They think I might have just misplaced it or something." He sounded incredulous, and honestly a little unhinged. "Misplaced a whole car?" I asked, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "Exactly. Like I'm some kind of idiot who forgets where he parked his brand new sports car. This is ridiculous. But then they asked me if anyone else had access to the keys." There was a pause, and I could practically feel his gaze narrowing through the phone line. "And that's when I thought of you." My blood ran cold. I knew this was coming, but it still hit me like a punch to the gut. "Me? Why would you think of me?" I tried to sound offended, indignant even. "Oh, come on, Daniel. Don't act so innocent. You've always been jealous of me, haven't you? Jealous of my car, my life." "That's not true, Logan," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I have my own life, a good life. I don't need to be jealous of yours." "Yeah, right. Look, I'm just saying, you're the only one who would have any reason to do something like this. You've always been so resentful." "Resentful?" I scoffed. "I've always been the one who's had to pick up your slack, Logan. I've bailed you out of more messes than I can count. And now you're accusing me of stealing your car." "I'm not accusing you," he said, though his tone said otherwise. "I'm just saying, it's a possibility. You've always been the quiet one, the one nobody suspects. Maybe you finally snapped." "Snapped?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Maybe I finally realized I don't have to put up with your BS anymore." The line went silent for a moment. Then, Logan's voice, low and dangerous, cut through the quiet. "What did you just say?" I said, "Maybe I'm tired of being the one who always has to be understanding, the one who always has to forgive and forget. Maybe I'm tired of watching you take everything for granted." "Are you saying you took my car?" He sounded genuinely shocked now, as if the possibility had just fully registered. I hesitated for a split second. This was the point of no return. "Maybe I did," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear Logan's brain trying to process what I just admitted. You sold my car?" he finally stammered, his voice laced with disbelief. "That's right," I confirmed. "But why? Why would you do that? Why?" I repeated, the anger that had been simmering inside me for years finally bubbling to the surface. "Because you don't deserve it, Logan. You don't deserve anything you haven't worked for. You treat Mom and Dad like an ATM. You wreck everything you touch, and you never take responsibility for your actions. Well, guess what? This time, there are consequences." His voice rose to a shout. "You had no right. That was my car. Actually, technically, it was Mom and Dad's car, since they co-signed on the loan." I corrected him calmly. And they were tired of your irresponsibility too. You went behind my back? You talked to them about this. He sounded betrayed, which, frankly, was a little rich coming from him. They didn't know I was going to sell it, Logan. But they weren't exactly surprised when I told them what happened, which was a slight exaggeration, but it served my purpose. The rest of the conversation was a blur of accusations, threats, and insults. Logan called me every name under the sun, accused me of being jealous, spiteful, and just plain crazy. I held my ground, calmly explaining my reasons, though I doubt he was really listening. He hung up eventually, promising that I would regret this, that he would make my life a living hell. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up to Logan, in the most dramatic way possible. A part of me felt a surge of triumph, a sense of liberation I hadn't felt in years. But another part of me was terrified of the fallout. The next morning, my phone rang incessantly. It was Logan, then my mom, then my dad, all wanting to know what the hell was going on. I answered my parents' call, my voice shaking slightly. "Daniel, is it true? Did you really sell Logan's car?" My mom asked, her voice filled with disbelief and a hint of anger. "Yes, Mom, it's true," I said, bracing myself for the onslaught. "But why? Why would you do something like that?" My dad chimed in, sounding more confused than angry. I explained my reasons, just like I had to Logan, recounting years of his irresponsibility and the financial and emotional toll it had taken on them. I told them how tired I was of always being the one who had to be understanding while Logan got away with everything. To my surprise, their reaction wasn't entirely negative. They were shocked, of course, and worried about the conflict between me and Logan. But there was also a sense of resignation in their voices, like they'd finally reached the end of their rope with his behavior too. "We've been worried about him, Daniel," my mom admitted quietly. "He just doesn't seem to be able to get his life together. Maybe this will finally be a wake-up call for him," I said, trying to sound hopeful. "Maybe," my dad said, but he didn't sound convinced. "But what are we going to do now? He's furious. He says he's going to sue you." "Let him try," I said, a newfound confidence hardening my voice. "I have the paperwork. And honestly, Dad, maybe it's time he learned to deal with the consequences of his own actions." The next few weeks were tense. Logan moved back in with my parents, his anger simmering just below the surface. He avoided talking to me, but I could feel his resentment every time we were in the same room. My parents tried to mediate, but it was clear that the dynamic in our family had shifted dramatically. Then, something unexpected happened. About a month after I sold the car, Logan actually got a job. A real job with regular hours and responsibilities. I was surprised, to say the least. When I asked my mom about it, she said he'd been forced to face reality without the crutch of his fancy car and the easy financial support from them. He needed money, and for the first time in a long time he had to actually work for it. It wasn't a glamorous job. He was working at a local auto parts store, but he was sticking with it. He even started talking about saving up to buy a used, more sensible car. My parents were cautiously optimistic. One evening, about 3 months after the whole car debacle, I got a text from Logan. It was short and to the point. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for a moment, then texted back, "Okay." We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our places. It was awkward at first. We sat in silence for a few minutes, stirring our drinks, avoiding eye contact. Finally, Logan cleared his throat. "Look, Daniel," he said, his voice surprisingly subdued. I wanted to say, I was really pissed off about the car. "I figured," I said dryly. He actually chuckled a little. "Yeah, well, you can imagine. But I've been thinking, and maybe you were right." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his admission. I mean, about me not taking responsibility. About Mom and Dad always bailing me out. Losing the car. It kind of forced me to, I don't know, grow up a little. I waited for the other shoe to drop. But it didn't. He actually seemed sincere. "I'm not saying I forgive you for selling my car," he continued. a hint of his old defensiveness creeping back in. But, I get it. Sort of. We talked for a while longer, a real conversation, the kind we hadn't had in years. He told me about his job, about how it was actually kind of okay. He was learning things, meeting new people. He even admitted that he was starting to feel a sense of accomplishment. He didn't apologize, not exactly. But he didn't need to. His words, his demeanor, they spoke volumes. It was like the dramatic act of selling his car had finally shaken him out of his entitled stupor. Things aren't perfect between us, not by a long shot. There's still a lot of history there, a lot of baggage to unpack. But for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm living in Logan's shadow anymore. I stood up for myself, I took a risk, and it actually led to something positive, not just for me, but maybe even for Logan. I still have the money from the car sale tucked away in that safe deposit box. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. Maybe I'll use it to take a vacation, something I've always put off. Or maybe I'll just keep it as a reminder of the time I finally said enough was enough. Whatever I decide, one thing is clear. My new plan worked. It was drastic, maybe even a little crazy, but it was exactly what our family needed. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, Logan and I can finally start building a different kind of relationship. One where we can both stand in our own light, not in each other's shadows. The future is still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I feel a sense of hope. And that, I realize, is worth more than any sports car.